From time to time, clients ask me to go through specific events that are big, that are happening, and it's because a few of my clients are actually asked to attend certain events. The inauguration was actually one such event, and my client asked me, "Hey May, is it safe? What do you see?" And so I looked at the inauguration and I was like, oh. Since then, I've seen a lot of astrologers post on the inauguration focusing on one single negative aspect. And while I acknowledge that that really is a thing, I think it's a little bit awkward to ignore everything else that's on that chart, much of which is actually positive. Now, if you're a client asking, this might be like a 1-hour session. This is free on the internet, so we're gonna try to make it as quick as possible. In this video, this is what we're gonna do. First, I'm gonna talk about the aspect that everybody's focused on. Then we're gonna talk about the right side of the chart. Then we're gonna talk about the left side of the chart. And then we'll talk about the chart and composite. But before we get into that, even though I've been an astrologer for 3 decades, I'm new to social media. So if you could help a girl out with a follow, some hearts, thumbs up, comments, forward, whatever, that would be amazing. I appreciate you. Now let's get into this chart. Now, this is the chart for the inauguration. And while you could say, hey, that's just a one-time event because it is the first day of this 4-year administration, it's also kind of correct to think that this is the chart surrounding what will happen in the next 4 years. That's why to read only one very sharp aspect kind of didn't sit right with me, such that I was like, oh, I should make a video. Now, where folks have gotten very cautionary to almost negative and then dragged it into what the entire administration will be like is this opposition on the chart. That's going to be the Mars down in the 3rd house in Cancer relative to the Sun Pluto in the 10th house, 1 minute, 41 seconds. So a degree just in the house of Aquarius. And that is more or less in opposition to Mars. Correctly so, they see it as a bit of a powder keg, incredibly intense, incredibly stressful. This 3rd house Cancerian Mars pulling against this Sun Pluto in Aquarius in the 10th house. Now let's put it into layman's terms. In something like a governmental event, what it would represent is 2 factions that are pulling at opposite ends at each other and in conflict with each other, quite frankly. You've got Mars in Cancer, which represents security in so many ways if you ignore the house. And then you've got Sun, Pluto, and Aquarius, which is the new way of doing things that's coming in. And in particular, it's going to be the technology-oriented, evolutionary-oriented, higher power-oriented. And I think what's happening for a lot of people is that they're reading these charts with a little bit of bias. Folks have stopped right there and are like, this means there's going to be fighting. Trump represents all the old and stale bad stuff, and this is terrible. And then some people are crazy pro-Trump, and they are like, this is the new regime, and we're going to be fighting with all the BS of the last regime, and that's why the fighting happens, and it's a powder keg, and so be it. And what I just want to say is that we've missed a few data points on this chart that are kind of important. Okay, first of all, it's really important to understand that the Sun and Pluto are in the forward motion, but Mars is in retrograde, and Mars will continue to be retrograde until we get over to February 28th. Now, why is it relevant? It's relevant because it's a backtrack, essentially in the 3rd house, the house of comments made and things said. This is going to be Cancer, though, so it's things said for the purpose of security that, in fact, do not make us safe. Things like, oh, I don't know, China is going to control us through TikTok, or that needs to be done for security purposes. This opposition of Sun and Pluto going into Aquarius with this backtracking of what actually is going to make us more secure as a nation, what's actually going to be the right thing, it's going to come to pass. There's going to be some people that in such an opposition are going to pull against the forward momentum by basically potentially saying some things that are false. And here, because the other opposition that you see is this Mars opposition Mercury in the forward motion in the house of Capricorn, truth's going to come out. And so this opposition with the Sun and Pluto in the 10th house, which is the very public regime shift that is happening, it's a double check on that idea of security. And the tension associated with it appears to me as a group of people that did things to keep us safe, and now they want to kind of hide and obscure that as the new regime comes in and checks it. And that's the nature of the tension. But that's not the only planet on this chart. So there's other things that are kind of important. So now let's talk about the right side of the chart. Now in that regard, you really only have two planets. You've got Mercury and Capricorn in opposition to that Mars. And then you have Moon in Libra in the 6th house, square both that Mercury and that Mars. What's that mean? So let's take this Mercury first. Mercury is in opposition to that Mars in retrograde, and it is hanging out in Capricorn, okay? Mercury in Capricorn by itself is the old way of communication, not the new ways of communication. It's going to represent things that were said that we thought were true. It's in opposition to this fact-checking that's going on in the 3rd house in Cancer. The rationale there is going to be security based. So it's all of those things that have been coming up in the last few months related to security, feeling safe as a country, feeling safe on the personal level, is shining in opposition to the existing structures that have been there telling us stuff that we may or may not think is true. That's going to be in opposition. It's going to start on the inauguration. It's going to basically be a part of this entire administration. You got to realize that with that Sun Pluto there, the trajectory of what's going on is that we're moving forward and we're moving on, and then there's a set of people that don't know how to communicate in this new lexicon. It's going to look a little bit like when you have an older parent and you're trying to train them to use ChatGPT, but before you do that, you already have to get them to even use a Roku or a Fire Stick, and they are trying really, really hard to understand why this is better. It's going to look like that. That's what is the energy of this administration. It's going to have to be this whole, hey, let's just let it go, that you, as a function of not understanding, maybe behaved a certain way. If this was someone's personal chart, I would focus on the word forgiveness. And if I was confused that I should focus on the word forgiveness, there's the other planet that's on this side of the chart, namely Moon in Libra, and it is square Mercury, square Mars. Moon hanging out in Libra is forming a triangle that we call a T-square, because it's 90 degree, 90 degree, and 180 degree down the middle. And some people read this as super negative. I don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is because I got a bunch of T-squares in my chart and my life is awesome. But a T-square doesn't become awesome unless you resolve the oppositions. In other words, you need to be kind as relates to the misunderstandings that may have been done for a sense of security. Whether or not it did that or not, it's irrelevant. And then you need to be gentle as folks come into this new way of communication in Mercury. And if you can do that, then you actually grow, in this case, Moon in Libra in the 6th house, which is you resolve the conflicts in this empathic, thoughtful way. This potentiality exists, believe it or not, in the next 4 years. Now, I'm sure some that are truly passionately against this administration that's coming in are going to just turn this off and hate my guts for the rest of my life. But what I would say is that it's the entire administration, the entirety of the 4 years. If this was an individual client asking me about his company and that this represented the start date of it or the beginning of a big launch, I would tell them to look for the folks that can make peace and are really gifted at realizing that fear-based actions come from a place of confusion, misunderstanding. Resolve that and you make peace. That's what I would say if it was like someone starting a business on this day. Now, I recognize that what I've read so far is cautiously optimistic at the best, and in the worst is slightly negative. But now I'm going to read the left side of this chart. Now, when I look at the left side of this chart, I think to myself, wow, so many astrologers thought that Trump was going to lose the election. This side of the chart kind of screams Elon Musk. Now, a lot of this may be because of the way people think about Aquarius, Uranus, and the 11th house. And for a lot of folks, they think of Age of Aquarius, and where we're all going to be more enlightened, ascend, etc. But one thing that is actually very much so true about those three areas is the idea that it represents innovation, technology. And all these planets on this side, their placements, their aspects, in a nutshell, scream the fact that we are going to be transforming as a society into this new innovative future. I mean, look, you got Uranus trine the Mars in retrograde, and then you've got it essentially sextile the Sun in Aquarius. If that doesn't scream, we're going to figure out what went wrong and then fix it with technology, I don't know what does. And if I was confused that these were going to be negative changes, I've got these two cute little triangles here telling me unambiguously that they are for the positive, okay? I've got Neptune, Uranus, Sun, Pluto, and I've got Saturn, Uranus, and Mercury. And those are combinations of trine and sextile aspects, all very positive. Now, what's all that astrological mumbo jumbo mean? Here's the deal. You got Uranus in the first house in Taurus, that beautiful, strong entrepreneurial capability, positively aspected by Sun Pluto, this changing, shifting regime that's coming into power and is getting to be front and center. And that's going to positively impact Neptune in the 12th house in Pisces. So it's all staying all aligned for this vision and dream to come to pass. And because this is the inauguration, this is the United States' fate for this regime change, that's a real positive. You've got Uranus, once again, that entrepreneur spirit, this time also positively aspected to Mercury. So we're going to communicate, we're going to improve that. And then you've got Saturn in the 11th house in Pisces. And while some people might read Saturn always as negative, here it's so positively aspected, I think you're kind of wrong to do that, because this is really learning the lessons that bring this period forward. This little thing I'm going to go through and close this off is what's going on with that Jupiter in the first house with that squared aspect to Saturn. Some might be like, well, May, doesn't that mean that Saturn is going to be negatively stimulated by Jupiter? And I agree, that's true. But because everything else pointing to Saturn is so supportive and positive, I read this as won't be able to pretend like the problems aren't the problems. They're going to come to light and we're going to see them so that we can fix them.
Another interpretation might be that the person leading and manifesting this into existence is not who we necessarily think it is.
Cut it off right there. And I know that there's still a lot left on this chart for other astrologers to come in that disagree or have a different perspective on the nuance of how to read this. But when I look at this chart overall, it is more hopeful than negative. And while there may be a bit of a rough patch, because most certainly in the next 4 years, we're going to have miscommunications and we're going to have some things that come to light that are very unexpected. But it does look like from this chart, the bulk of what's going to be dealt with during this administration is technology moving us forward for the positive. And I want to be really clear on that. Sometimes it's not about this guy had the best plan, that guy had the best plan, this person had the best leadership, that person would have been a better leader. But it just so happens that this set of activities happens in society, and then the leadership in question has to rise to the occasion. And so to the extent that the inauguration sets the next 4 years, yeah, it's going to be bumpy. Yeah, we're going to find out some stuff, and then we're going to have to deal with and process that stuff. And if we can do it in a manner that is thoughtful to all parties, we have a shot of coming out the other side of this administration very much so in a better place with technological advances that should help, not hurt us. That's all I've got for this episode. If you could do me a solid and like this video or follow me, that would be amazing. Throw me some comments down below, especially if you have ideas for future episodes. Take care, everybody, and good luck. Stay safe and try to be patient with your fellow folks.